Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Michael Crowfeather, and for 16 years, I never lost a single person in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Not one. That's something you can be proud of when you're a park ranger in Virginia's most dangerous areas. I've pulled 847 people out of trouble, broken legs, heart attacks, bear encounters, you name it. The badge on my chest means something because of that record. People always ask how I do it. Truth is, it comes from two places. First, my time in Vietnam taught me how to track anything that moves and how to stay calm when things go bad. Real bad. Second, my Cherokee grandmother taught me to listen to the mountains. She said they talk to those who know how to hear them. But there's one thing I never listened to. The old stories my grandmother told about something she called Kanida. The hunger that walks like a man, but eats more than just flesh. I thought those were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the deep places. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. It was October 1974 when everything changed. The leaves were turning red and gold, and the tourist season was winding down. That's usually when the serious cave explorers come out, the ones who know what they're doing and don't need babysitting. 3 of them had permits to map some new passages in the restricted sections of Luray Caverns, real professionals with years of experience. Their names were Dr. Sarah Chen, a geology professor from UVA, Marcus Webb, who'd been caving since he was 12 and knew these mountains better than most rangers, and Tommy Rodriguez, young but careful, studying to be a cave rescue specialist himself. They were supposed to check in every 2 hours. When they missed their first call, I wasn't worried. Radio signals get funny underground. When they missed the second one, I started putting on my gear. The cave entrance looked normal enough in the afternoon allow. I've been down there dozens of times for rescues. But something felt off as I got closer. The air was cold. I mean really cold, like winter cold, even though it was 80 degrees outside. My breath started making little puffs of fog, which just doesn't happen in October, Virginia. Then I saw the marks. Someone or something had clawed deep grooves into the limestone around the cave mouth. They were huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen sign of. But they weren't random scratches. They looked almost like fingers, really long fingers. I called it into headquarters, but my radio just gave me static. That should have been my first warning to turn around and wait for backup. Should have been. But 3 good people were down there somewhere, and I had a job to do. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees the moment I stepped inside. My flashlight beam seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was eating up the light. I'd changed the batteries that morning, but it felt like I was trying to light up the bottom of the ocean with a candle. I found their rope about 200 feet down the main passage. It should have been tied off to the anchor bolts they'd installed. Instead, it was cut, not frayed or worn through, cut clean with something sharp enough to slice through climbing rope like it was string. That's when my compass started spinning, round and round like a top, never settling on any direction. In 16 years of cave work, I'd never seen anything like it. These caves aren't magnetic. There's nothing down here that should mess with a compass. I kept going deeper, following the chalk marks Sarah's team had left on the walls. Standard cave procedure. Mark your path so you can find your way back. But the marks were getting weird. Instead of neat arrows pointing toward the entrance, they became jagged scratches. Some looked like they'd been made in a hurry. Others looked like someone had been dragged past while trying to mark the wall. The passage opened up into a chamber I'd never seen before, and I thought I knew every inch of this cave system. My light swept across the floor and stopped on something white. Teeth. Human teeth scattered across the cave floor in a perfect circle. I've seen plenty of bad things in my time. War, accidents, people who didn't make it out of the mountains alive. But this was different. These teeth weren't just pulled out. They were arranged, placed with care, like someone was decorating. I bagged a few for evidence and kept moving. The chalk marks led deeper into passages that weren't on any map I'd ever seen. The walls were getting smoother, like something large had been rubbing against them for a long time. That's when I heard Sarah's voice. "Michael? Michael, is that you? Thank God we're down here. We're hurt bad. Follow my voice." The sound came from a tunnel to my left. I called back, "Sarah, where are you? Are Marcus and Tommy with you?" Yes, we're all here. But we can't move. You have to come to us. Please hurry." Something about her voice bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the echo, or maybe it was just cave acoustics playing tricks. I headed toward the sound, marking my own path as I went. The tunnel got narrower, then wider, then narrow again. I had to crawl through one section that was barely big enough for a person. When I came out the other side, I was in another chamber, this one bigger than a school gymnasium, and I found Marcus. He was hanging about 10 feet off the ground, wrapped up in something that looked like rope but felt wrong when I touched it. It was sticky and warm, and when my light hit it right, I could see it was made of hair. Human hair braided together with something else, something that looked like tendons. Marcus was alive, but barely. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. When I called his name, he turned his head slow, like it hurt to move. "Don't let it feed again," he whispered. "Don't let it grow." Marcus had happened. "Where are Sarah and Tommy?" He just kept staring and whispering about feeding time and something growing in the deep places. I cut him down, but he couldn't walk, couldn't even stand up properly. It was like something had drained all the strength right out of him. That's when I heard Sarah's voice again. But this time, Marcus was right next to me, and I could see his lips weren't moving. "Michael, we're deeper in. You have to come alone. Don't bring Marcus. It doesn't want him anymore." The voice was coming from 3 different directions at once. I knew then that something was very wrong with this whole situation. But I couldn't leave without finding Sarah and Tommy, and Marcus was in no shape to climb out on his own. I had to make a choice that still keeps me up at night. I hid Marcus in a small side chamber with my emergency water and told him to stay quiet, no matter what he heard. Then I went deeper. The passages kept changing. I swear they did. Tunnels I'd just walked through weren't there when I tried to go back. New openings appeared in walls that had been solid rock minutes before. My chalk marks disappeared from surfaces where I'd just drawn them. And the whole time, Sarah's voice kept calling from up ahead, always just around the next corner. I found Tommy in a chamber that looked like a cathedral made of bones. Human bones stacked up the walls in patterns that hurt to look at. Some of those bones were old, really old, stained dark and worn smooth. Others still had bits of cloth stuck to them. Tommy was alive, but he wasn't right in the head. He kept talking about the growing and how it needed to feed to get bigger. When I tried to help him up, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You have to feed me to it," he said, and his eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, everything. "It hurts to be this hungry. Just let it eat me, Sit. The hurting stops." I've never heard a person beg to die like that. It's a sound that changes you. Something moved in the shadows at the far end of the bone chamber. Something big enough that I could hear its breathing echo off the walls. The sound wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. It was like someone trying to breathe through water. My flashlight beam caught it for just a second. 8 feet tall at least, thin as a rail but with muscles that stood out like cables under gray skin. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. And its face looked like it had been stretched out, pulled long like taffy. It smiled at me with too many teeth. "Hello, Michael," it said in Sarah's voice. Then it switched to Marcus's voice. "Thank you for coming down here." Then Tommy's voice. "We've been waiting for you." Each word came from a different throat, like it was playing recordings. But I could see its mouth moving, see its tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Where's Sarah?" I managed to ask. It pointed to the bone walls with one impossibly long finger. "Sarah is here, Marcus is here, Tommy is here. Soon you'll be here too, and I'll be bigger, stronger, smarter." That's when I understood what my grandmother's stories had been trying to tell me. This thing didn't just kill people, it absorbed them, their knowledge, their memories, their voices. Everything that made them who they were became part of it. and it had been doing this for a very long time. The creature started moving toward me, not walking, but flowing like smoke with weight. I backed away, but the entrance to the chamber sealed itself with a grinding sound of stone on stone. "Grandfather," I whispered, remembering the Cherokee words my grandmother had taught me for protection. "Help me now." The thing stopped moving and tilted its head like a dog hearing a strange sound. I kept praying in Cherokee, louder now, and the creature actually took a step back. Its smile faded, and for the first time it looked uncertain. "What are you doing?" it asked in its own voice now. A sound, like grinding gravel. I didn't answer. I just kept praying and started backing toward what I hoped was still a wall. My hand found rough stone, then an opening I hadn't seen before. Without stopping the prayer, I slipped through. Behind me, the thing let out a sound like a mountain screaming. The new passage sloped upward, and I could feel a slight breeze that meant it led somewhere. But I could also hear the creature following me, moving through solid rock like it was water. The Cherokee prayers seemed to slow it down but not stop it. I ran through tunnels that shifted around me, always heading up when I could find an upward path. The thing's voice followed me, sometimes pleading in Sarah's voice, sometimes threatening in voices I didn't recognize, voices of people who'd disappeared in these mountains over the years, hikers we'd never found, cavers who'd gone missing. "You can't run forever, Michael," it called in the voice of a child. "I know every rock, every passage. This is my home, has been for more than 100 years." I stumbled into a chamber where an underground stream ran through the middle. The water was moving fast, cutting a channel through the rock on its way to some underground river system. The moment my boots touched the water, the creature's voice changed. It sounded afraid. "No," it said. "Not the water. Don't go into the water." I waded deeper. The current was strong, but I could keep my footing. Behind me, I heard the creature pace back and forth at the water's edge, but it didn't follow. "It won't last," it called. "I'll find another way. I'll wait. I've waited this long." The stream carried me through passages I'd never seen, tumbling me along in water cold enough to numb my hands and feet. But it was moving up, toward the surface. I could feel it. When I finally crawled out of the water onto dry rock, I could see actual sunlight filtering down from somewhere above. Real sunlight, not the pale glow of emergency cave lighting. I climbed for what felt like hours, following that blessed light. My radio started working again when I got close to the surface. The first thing I did was call for a complete cave closure and a hazmat team. I came out through an entrance I'd never seen before, about a mile from where I'd gone in. The sun was rising, painting the mountains gold and red. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. But I could still hear that thing calling from somewhere underground, promising to find me, promising to feed. The official report says there was a cave-in, gas pocket explosion caused by geological instability. The Park Service sealed every entrance to that cave system with concrete thick enough to stop a tank. The whole area is marked as a geological hazard zone now. They found Marcus where I'd left him, alive but changed. He doesn't talk much anymore, and when he does, it's about feeding time and the growing thing in the dark. The doctors say it's trauma, but I know better. Part of him is still down there, still connected to that thing. We never found Sarah or Tommy. Officially, their bodies were lost in the cave-in. I transferred to Yellowstone within 2 months. Couldn't stand to look at those mountains anymore, knowing what was underneath them. But even in Wyoming, I have dreams about bone chambers and voices calling from the dark. My grandmother's Cherokee friends tell me there are others. Things like the Canida living in cave systems all through the Appalachians, growing stronger, getting smarter, waiting for the right time to hunt again. Sometimes I get calls from other rangers in Virginia. Hikers gone missing near caves. Strange sounds underground. Teeth found arranged in patterns that don't make sense. The seismic activity from mining operations has opened new passages. Cracks in the concrete seals. The thing I met down there, it's patient, but it's not gone. My own kids won't go camping with me anymore. They say they hear voices calling from storm drains and basement wit, in dhows. Voices that sound like their old man but aren't quite right. If you're reading this, stay out of the deep places. Trust the old warnings, especially from people whose families have been in these mountains for generations. They know things we've forgotten. And if you ever hear someone calling your name from underground, someone who sounds exactly like a person you know, don't answer. Don't go looking. Some hungers are older than our understanding, and they're always growing. The thing I fought down there, it called my name in my own voice just before I escaped, which means it has part of me now, too. Part of my knowledge, my memories, my voice. Sometimes I wonder if the man who climbed out of that cave was really Michael Crowfeather, or just something that thinks it is. I guess we'll find out when the hunger gets too strong to resist. My name is Elizabeth Ravenshollow, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 13 years. People always ask me about my last name. Sounds made up, right? But it's real. My great-grandfather came here from Scotland back in the 1800s. The name fits, I guess. These mountains are full of dark hollows where strange things happen. I specialize in finding missing kids. In 13 years, I've found 156 children who wandered off or got lost in these woods. Every single one. That's my record, and I'm proud of it. I know these mountains better than most people know their own backyards. I can track a scared 6-year-old through 3 miles of thick forest. I can tell you which way a lost child will go just by looking at the terrain. The thing is, I never believed the old stories. You know the ones. Mountain families have been telling them for generations. Stories about wild folk, kids who went missing years ago and now live like animals in the deep woods. They say these wild children steal babies from campsites, taking them back to their hidden colonies. Pure nonsense, I always thought. Just stories to scare people. But in July of 1981, everything I believed got turned upside down. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee in my office when the call came in. A family from Atlanta had been camping at Elkmont. Their 7-year-old daughter, Sarah, had vanished sometime during the night. No sounds of struggle, no signs of animals. She was just gone. 3 days later, another call. This time it was a 6-year-old boy named Tommy Morrison. His family had been camping near Cataract Falls. Tommy had been playing by their tent after lunch. His mother looked away for maybe 2 minutes to check on the baby. When she looked back, Tommy had disappeared. By the end of that second week, 3 more children had vanished, all under 10 years old, all taken, during daylight hours when their families were right there. 5 kids, total, all from different campsites within a 3-mile area around Cataract Falls. This wasn't normal. In 13 years, I'd never seen anything like it. I started interviewing the families. What they told me made my skin crawl. Every parent said the same thing. Their child had seemed called somehow, like something in the forest was pulling them. The kids had just walked away mid-conversation, no fear, no hesitation. They went into the woods like they were going home. But here's what really bothered me. I found tracks at every campsite, small, bare feet, children's feet. But the stride length was all wrong. These tracks showed someone running faster than any human child could move, way faster. And there was something else. I've tracked hundreds of lost kids over the years. Their scent trails usually wander around, double back, show signs of confusion or panic. These trails were different. They headed straight into the deep forest, like the children knew exactly where they were going. And every trail ended at water, streams where the scent just disappeared. That's not something a scared, lost child would know how to do. That's advanced tracking knowledge. On my 7th day searching, I found something that changed everything. Hidden about 2 miles from the main trail, I discovered a path I'd never seen before. It was narrow, almost invisible, winding through the thickest part of the forest. But it was definitely a trail. Someone had been using it regularly, and carved into the trees along this hidden path were symbols, not random scratches, deliberate markings, crude drawings of mountains, animals, and what looked like children holding hands in circles. I followed that trail for 3 hours before I had to turn back. But I knew I'd found something important, something that might lead me to these O's missing children. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those symbols, those impossible tracks, those parents saying their kids seemed called into the woods. For the first time in 13 years, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the old mountain stories weren't just stories after all. The next morning, I set up hidden cameras along the secret trail. If someone was using this path, I wanted to know who. I also brought my best tracking gear and enough supplies to stay out there for days if needed. By noon, I was deep in the forest, following those strange symbols. The trail led up the mountain, through areas so thick with trees that barely any sunlight got through. It was quiet. Too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to avoid this place. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard something that made me freeze. Children laughing. It was faint, coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. But there weren't supposed to be any children out here. This was miles from any camping area, and some of the roughest terrain in the park. I moved forward carefully, staying low, trying not to make noise. The laughter got louder. Then I heard voices. Kids talking to each other, but I couldn't make out the words. The language sounded strange. Not quite English. I crept to the edge of a small clearing and looked through the bushes. What I saw should have been impossible. There were children in that clearing. Maybe 8 or 10 of them, ages ranging from what looked like 6 to 15. But they weren't normal children. They were dirty, half naked, their hair long and tangled. They moved like wild animals, quick and alert, constantly checking the air for scents. And they were fast, faster than any human child should be. I watched one boy, maybe 10 years old, leap from a standing position onto a tree branch 8 feet off the ground. Another girl ran across the clearing so quickly she was just a blur. They had crude tools, sharp sticks, rocks tied to handles with what looked like animal hide, and they were using them to clean a rabbit they'd caught. The way they worked together, the way they communicated with hand signals and grunts, it was like watching a pack of intelligent animals. I was so focused on watching them that I almost missed the sound behind me. Footsteps, bare feet on leaves. Someone was sneaking up on me. I turned around slowly and my heart nearly stopped. It was a little girl, maybe 7 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes. She looked exactly like the photos I'd seen of Sarah, the first missing child. But her eyes were different. Wild. Alert in a way that human children's eyes never are. She stood there staring at me for what felt like forever. Then she opened her mouth and made a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't human. It was like a bird call, but deeper, more complex, a warning signal. Immediately, the children in the clearing went silent. Then they were gone. Not running away, just gone, like they'd melted into the forest. The little girl looked at me one more time, tilted her head like a curious animal, and then she was gone too. Moving through the trees so fast and quiet I couldn't even see which way she went. I sat there shaking for 10 minutes before I could move again. When I finally made it back to my truck, I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the dirt on my windshield was one of those symbols from the trees. A circle with smaller circles inside it. They knew I'd been watching them, and somehow they'd known exactly where to find my truck. That night, I went through every missing child report from the past 20 years. I cross-referenced them with the old mountain stories, looking for patterns. What I found kept me awake until dawn. Children had been disappearing in this area for over a century. Always the same age range. Always from the same general location. And according to the oldest stories, some of them, wild folk seen in these mountains looked far too old to be recent disappearances. The math was simple and terrifying. If children had been vanishing for 100 years and some of those children had survived in the wild, and if they'd had children of their own, I was looking at multiple generations of feral human beings living in the Great Smoky Mountains, and they were still taking new children to join them. I couldn't report what I'd seen. Who would believe me? Instead, I decided to go back. Those 5 missing children were still out there, and it was my job to find them. This time I brought better equipment. Night vision goggles, long-range cameras, climbing gear. If these wild children could move through the trees like animals, I needed to be able to follow them. I also brought something else, a tranquilizer gun. If I found those missing kids, I might need to sedate them to get them out safely. The hidden trail was easy to follow now that I knew what to look for. But this time, I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes watching me from the moment I left the main path. They knew I was coming. About a mile in, I found the first sign that these weren't just lost children playing in the woods. It was a warning system. Bones tied to branches with strips of hide, arranged in patterns that would rattle and clank when the wind blew. But it wasn't random. The bones were positioned so they'd make specific sounds, a crude but effective alarm system. Past the bone rattles, I found more elaborate constructions, pits covered with branches and leaves, deadfall traps made from heavy rocks balanced on sticks. These weren't games. This was defensive engineering designed to stop adult humans from getting further up the mountain. I was careful, but I wasn't careful enough. I stepped on what looked like solid ground and suddenly found myself hanging upside down, caught in a rope snare. The rope was made from twisted plant fibers, stronger than anything I'd ever seen, and it had been positioned perfectly to catch someone my height and weight. While I was hanging the wool, struggling to reach my knife, I heard them coming. Footsteps, lots of them, moving through the forest with perfect coordination, surrounding me. Then I saw them emerging from behind trees and bushes, more wild children than I'd seen before, maybe 20 of them, ranging from small kids to teenagers. But it was the teenager who made my blood freeze. He was maybe 16 or 17, tall and lean, with muscles like steel cables. His hair was black and reached his shoulders. His skin was tanned dark from living outdoors. And his eyes held intelligence. Not animal cunning, human intelligence, but focused and predatory in a way that civilized humans never develop. He walked up to where I was hanging and studied me like I was an interesting bug he'd caught. Then he spoke. "You are the one who tracks the taken children." His English was perfect, but his voice was strange, like he hadn't used human language in a long time. "My name is Elizabeth," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a park ranger. Those 5 children who went missing, I just want to make sure they're safe." He tilted his head, considering this. "Safe," he repeated, like the word was foreign to him. "You mean protected from harm?" "Yes. They are protected. They are with us now. They are becoming what they were meant to become." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he made a gesture. 2 smaller children came forward, carrying sharp stone knives. For a moment I thought they were going to kill me. Instead, they cut the rope holding me up. I crashed to the ground hard enough to see stars. When my vision cleared, the teenager was kneeling beside me. "You want to see the taken children? You want to know they are safe?" He smiled, and I saw his teeth were filed to points. "Come. But know this. Humans who see our home do not leave unchanged." He stood up and walked away. The other, wild children followed. After a moment of hesitation, so did I. What choice did I have? The path led up the mountain for another 2 miles, getting steeper and more difficult. But the wild children moved through it like they were walking on flat ground. They leaped from rock to rock, swung from branch to branch, communicated with hand signals and soft animal sounds. Finally, we reached what looked like a dead end, a sheer rock wall rising maybe 60 feet straight up. But the teenager walked right up to it and disappeared. It wasn't a solid wall. It was an optical illusion. Behind what looked like solid rock was a narrow opening, barely wide enough for one person. We squeezed through into a hidden valley I never would have found on my own. And there, in that secret valley, was their home. It wasn't one settlement. It was dozens of them. Tree houses built high in the canopy, connected by rope bridges. Cave openings in the cliff walls, with ladders made from twisted vines. Shelters built into the rocks themselves, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. And everywhere there were wild children. Babies crawling around naked in the dirt. Toddlers chasing each other through the trees. Kids and teenagers working together, making tools, preparing food, tending small fires. It was a complete society, a civilization of feral human beings who had been living in these mountains for generations. And there, playing with a group of other children near one of the cave entrances, I saw him, Tommy Morrison, the 6-year-old who had vanished from his family's campsite 2 weeks ago. But he wasn't the same child anymore. Tommy looked up when he saw me, and I knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. His eyes were different, sharper, more alert. He moved differently, too, with a fluid grace that reminded me of the other wild children. When I called his name, he tilted his head like he was trying to remember something from a distant dream. "Tommy?" I said again, kneeling down to get on his level. "Do you remember me? I'm Elizabeth. I'm here to take you home to your mommy and daddy." He studied my face for a long moment. Then he spoke, but not in English. He made the same complex, bird-like sounds I'd heard the other children using. Immediately, several of the wild children moved closer, forming a protective circle around him. The teenager who had brought me here stepped forward. "He remembers the old life," he said. "But he understands now that this is his true family. This is where he belongs." "He's 6 years old," I said, trying to keep my anger under control. "He belongs with his parents." "Does he?" The teenager gestured toward Tommy. "Look at him. Really look." I did look, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Tommy wasn't just acting differently. He was physically different. His muscles were more developed. His senses were clearly enhanced. He was tracking scents in the air, turning toward sounds I couldn't even hear. And when he moved with the same impossible speed and agility I'd seen in the other wild children. "What did you do to him?" "We freed him," the teenager said. "Humans are not meant to live in cages of wood and metal. We are not meant to eat poison food and breathe poison air. We are not meant to spend our lives sitting in boxes staring at glowing screens. We are meant to run free in the wild places, to hunt and live and grow strong." "You're talking about children," I said. "They need education, medical care, families who love them." "Look around you," he interrupted. "Do you see suffering here? Do you see fear, or hunger, or loneliness?" I did look around, and the truth was, I didn't see suffering. The wild children were clearly healthy, clearly happy. They moved with confidence and purpose. They worked together with a kind of cooperation I rarely saw in the civilized world. But they were still stolen children. "Their families are heartbroken," I said. "Their parents are crying themselves to sleep every night, wondering if their children are alive or dead." For the first time, the teenager's expression softened slightly. "That sadness will pass. The pain of loss always passes, but the joy these children have found with us, that will last forever. You can't just decide that for them. Can't we?" He gestured toward the other wild children. "Ask them if they want to go back to the world of concrete and steel. Ask them if they want to trade their freedom for safety, their strength for comfort." I looked around at the faces watching me. Children of all ages, from toddlers to teenagers. Some had been born here, I realized. Others had been brought here as young children and had grown up wild. And in every face, I saw the same thing. They were happy, genuinely, deeply happy, in a way that most civilized children never are. But that didn't make it right. "I'm taking Tommy home," I said firmly. "And the other missing children too." The teenager nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that." He made a gesture, and suddenly I was surrounded by wild children. Not threatening me exactly, but making it clear I wasn't leaving without their permission. "You have a choice," he said. "You can try to take them by force. You can go back to your world and bring other humans with guns and cages. You can treat us like animals to be captured and tamed. Or you can understand that some things are bigger than human law. Some changes can't be undone. Some freedoms are worth more than the comfort of the cage." I looked at Tommy again. He was watching me with those new, sharp eyes. And slowly, he shook his head. He didn't want to go back. "The choice is yours, Elizabeth Ravenshollow," the teenager said. But choose carefully, because once you leave this valley, you'll never find it again, and the children who stay here will be lost to your world forever. I stood there for a long time, thinking about the 5 missing children, about their grieving families, about my perfect record of finding lost kids. I thought about my duty as a park ranger, my responsibility to protect and serve. But I also thought about what I was seeing, a hidden world where children grew up free and strong and wild, a place where human beings lived the way they were meant to live, before civilization changed everything. In the end, I made a choice that still haunts me. I left them there. I returned to the park station and filed my report. 5 children, lost in the wilderness, presumed dead after extensive search efforts. The families were heartbroken, but they eventually accepted what everyone believed was the truth. Except it wasn't the truth. And I had to live with that. But 3 months later, something happened that made me realize my choice might have been right after all. I was patrolling near Cataract Falls when I found him, Tommy Morrison, sitting on a fallen log near the stream where his family had been camping. He was bigger now, stronger, his hair long and wild, but his eyes were still kind. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment I thought he might run. Instead, he walked over and hugged me. "Thank you," he whispered in my ear. "Thank you for letting me stay." Then he was gone, melting back into the forest like a ghost. I've been back to that area many times over the years. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them, children playing in the distance, shadows moving through the trees. The wild children are still there, still growing, still thriving in their hidden valley. And every now and then, another child goes missing from the camping areas around Cataract Falls. Always young children, always taken gently, always from families who say their child seemed called into the forest. I still search for them. It's my job. But I've never found that hidden valley again, no matter how hard I've looked. The wild children have kept their secret well. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Sometimes I think about those grieving families and feel sick with guilt. But then I remember Tommy's face when he thanked me. I remember the joy and freedom I saw in that hidden valley. Maybe there are different kinds of families. Maybe there are different ways to be human. The mountains keep their secrets, and I keep mine. But late at night, when the wind blows through the trees, I sometimes hear children laughing in the distance, wild, free, and happy. And I know they're exactly where they belong. My name is William Stormcrow, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. People always ask about my last name. My dad was Cherokee, my mom German. Growing up between two worlds taught me to respect both the old stories and hard facts. In my job, facts usually win. I work the abandoned mining areas in Wayne National Forest, West Virginia. It's not pretty work. I clear out dangerous mine shafts, post warning signs, and chase away kids looking for trouble. I've pulled more than a few copper thieves out of collapsed tunnels over the years. Most folks think it's boring work, but I like the quiet. The mountains don't lie to you like people do. Coal mining built these hills and killed them too. When the seams played out in the 60s, the companies just packed up and left. Didn't bother sealing most of the mines properly. That's where I come in, making sure nobody falls down a shaft or gets crushed by rotting timber. The old miners used to talk about Tommyknockers, little spirits that lived in the mines and warned about cave-ins. Knock once for yes, twice for no, 3 times for danger. I always figured it was just the mountain settling, metal expanding and contracting. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see and touch. But 3 weeks ago, something changed at Black Rock Mine. It started with a call from Sheriff Morrison. "Will, we got another body up at Black Rock. That's 4 in 2 months." 4 people dead in an abandoned mine isn't that unusual. These old shafts are death traps, bad air, rotten supports, hidden drops. What bothered me was how they died. The first was Tommy Jenkins, local kid looking for copper wire to sell. Found him sitting peacefully next to an old mine cart, like he'd just decided to take a rest. No injuries, no signs of struggle. The doc said his heart just stopped. Tommy was 19 and healthy as a horse. The second was some urban explorer from Pittsburgh with a YouTube channel. Same thing, found sitting calmly, no trauma, heart failure. The third was another copper thief. Then a college kid with a metal detector. All young, all healthy, all dead of apparent fright. Sheriff Morrison met me at the mine entrance. Whatever's killing these folks, it's got the whole county spooked. People are talking about the old curse. I knew the story. Black Rock Mine closed in 1962 after a cave-in killed 23 miners. Local Cherokee said the mine was cursed because it was built over sacred burial grounds. The mining company ignored the warnings, and men died for it. Tom, you know I don't believe in curses, I said, checking my equipment. Flashlight, rope, first aid kit, radio. Standard procedure. Maybe not, he said, but something's down there, and it's killing people. The mine entrance was bigger than I remembered. A dark mouth cut into the hillside, surrounded by rusty warning signs. The air coming out felt wrong somehow. Too warm for October, and it moved in little puffs like the mountain was breathing. I'd been in dozens of abandoned mines. They all felt dead. Cold, still, empty. Black Rock felt alive. As I walked toward the entrance, I heard it for the first time. A soft tapping sound, like someone knocking on wood. Probably just settling timber, I told myself. Old mines make all kinds of noises. But the tapping came in groups of three. 3 knocks. Danger. I should have turned around right then. 19 years of mine work had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. But 4 people were dead, and it was my job to find out why. The main tunnel sloped down into darkness. My flashlight beam showed rotting support beams and rusty rail tracks disappearing into the black. The air was warm and still, with a sweet smell I couldn't identify, not decay exactly, but something organic and old. The mine was bigger than the original blueprints showed. I'd studied the plans before coming down. Standard shaft mine with 3 main tunnels, and a few side branches. What I found was a maze of passages extending deep into the mountain. My radio crackled. "Will, you there?" Sheriff Morrison's voice sounded far away. "I'm here, Tom. This place is bigger than we thought. Going to take a while to search it all. Just be careful down there." The tapping started again as I moved deeper. Always 3 knocks, always from somewhere ahead of me. I followed the sound through twisting passages, past empty rooms that must have been equipment storage. The temperature stayed warm, which made no sense. Mines should be cold this time of year. I found the first body in a side tunnel. It was Sarah Chen, the college student with the metal detector. She sat with her back against the tunnel wall, metal detector still in her hands, eyes wide open and staring at nothing. Her face was perfectly peaceful, except for the eyes. They held a terror so complete it made my skin crawl. I checked for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. Her skin was warm, which was impossible. She'd been missing for 3 days. "Sheriff, I found Sarah Chen. Tom, something's not right down here." Static answered me. My radio was dead. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from deeper in the mine, echoing off the walls. Slow, heavy steps, like someone wearing work boots. The sound was followed by the scrape of metal on stone, like someone dragging tools. I called out, "Hello? Is someone down here?" The footsteps stopped. Then came the tapping again, frantic now. 3 knocks over and over, so fast they blurred together. I followed the sound around a bend and froze. A mining cart was moving by itself down the rusty tracks. It rolled slowly, wheels squeaking, loaded with chunks of coal that gleamed wetly in my flashlight beam. Behind it walked a figure in old-fashioned mining clothes, canvas pants, suspenders, a carbide lamp on his helmet. The figs. Yer was transparent. I could see right through him to the tunnel wall beyond. He pushed the cart with translucent hands, completely focused on his work, unaware that he'd been dead for decades. The ghost miner looked up at me. His face was gaunt and coal-stained, his eyes black holes in his skull. He nodded once, tipped his helmet, and walked right through the tunnel wall. The cart kept rolling until it disappeared into the darkness. I stood there shaking, trying to process what I'd seen. I'm a practical man. I don't believe in ghosts, but I just watched a dead miner push a cart full of coal through a tunnel that couldn't possibly still have coal in it. From deeper in the mine came the sound of pickaxes striking stone, the creak of timber, voices calling out in languages I didn't recognize. The mountain was full of dead miners still working their shifts 60 years after the cave-in killed them. And somewhere in that darkness, something else was moving, something that had learned to hunt. The tapping started again, but this time it was different. Not the random knocking of settling timber, but a clear pattern. Morse code. G-E-T-O-U-T. Get out. The Tommyknockers were trying to warn me. I should have listened to them. Instead, I went deeper. Call it duty, call it stupidity. I had to know what was killing people. The ghost miners were harmless, just echoes of the past stuck in their routine. Whatever was murdering visitors was something else entirely. The main tunnel branched into passages I'd never seen on any map. Some were hand-carved, too narrow for mining equipment. Others opened into natural caves that must have existed long before the mine was dug. The rock here was different too, older, with strange marks carved into the walls. My flashlight started acting up, flickering on and off. When it worked, the beam seemed dimmer than it should be, like the darkness was swallowing the light. During the flickers, I caught glimpses of things moving just beyond the edge of vision. The pickaxe sounds got louder as I went deeper. I turned a corner and found them, a dozen ghost miners working a coal face that couldn't be there. They swung their picks in perfect rhythm, coal flying from the wall even though their tools passed right through the rock. A supervisor stood behind them, consulting a pocket watch and calling out orders in a thick accent I couldn't place. They all turned to look at me. 12 pairs of hollow black eyes stared at me in complete silence. The supervisor raised his hand and pointed deeper into the mine, then shook his head violently. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He pointed again, more urgently, then drew his finger across his throat. Don't go that way. You'll die. But I had to. 2 more tunnels branched off from this chamber, and one of them had fresh boot prints in the coal dust. Someone else was down here, maybe in trouble. I followed the prints down a passage that angled sharply downward. The walls here were covered in symbols, not Cherokee, not any Native American writing I recognized. They were older, carved deep into the rock with primitive tools. Some showed human figures bowing down to something tall and many-armed. Others depicted what looked like ceremonies or sacrifices. The boot prints led to a chamber I shouldn't have found. It was huge, far too big to be natural. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above my flickering flashlight beam. The walls were smooth, polished by something other than mining tools. And at the center of the chamber was a pit. The pit was perfectly round, maybe 20 feet across, carved into the stone floor. Steps led down into it, worn smooth by countless feet over thousands of years. The boot prints stopped at the edge. I shined my light down into the pit and saw Mark Rodriguez. He was the urban explorer from Pittsburgh, the one with the YouTube channel. He sat cross-legged at the bottom of the pit, staring up at me with that same expression of absolute terror I'd seen on all the victims. His camera was still running, red light blinking in the darkness. "Mark," I called down. "Mark, can you hear me?" He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe, but his eyes tracked my movement as I walked around the pit's edge. That's when I felt it. Something vast and ancient stirred in the darkness below Mark. The pit was deeper than my light could reach, and something was down there in the black depths, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in puffs of vapor, and frost began forming on the walls. The symbols carved into the stone started to glow with a faint, sickly light. From the pit came a sound like wind through dead leaves, but I knew it was breathing. Something down there was waking up, and it was big. Mark's mouth opened in a silent scream. His body jerked once, then went still. Whatever had been keeping him alive was done with him. The breathing got louder, closer. I ran. Behind me, something erupted from the pit. I didn't look back, but I could hear it. A wet, sliding sound like a massive snake moving through water. The glow from the symbols grew brighter, casting twisted shadows on the tunnel walls as I stumbled through the darkness. The ghost miners were waiting for me in the main chamber. They stood in a line across the tunnel, pickaxes raised, but not to threaten me. They were protecting me, forming a barrier between me and whatever was coming up from the pit. The supervisor ghost stepped forward and grabbed my arm. His touch was ice cold, but solid, real. He pulled me toward a side tunnel I hadn't noticed before, one that angled upward toward the surface. Behind us, the thing from the pit let out a roar that shook dust from the ceiling and made my bones ache. It was the sound of hunger and rage and intelligence. Terrible, alien intelligence that had watched human civilization rise and fall like a single day. The ghost miners closed ranks as the creature approached. Through their translucent bodies, I saw something that defied description. A mass of writhing darkness with too many eyes, all focused on me with predatory hunger. "Go!" the supervisor ghost screamed, his voice finally breaking through from whatever realm the dead inhabit. "Go now!" I went. The tunnel the ghosts showed me was old, older than the mine, older than human settlement in these mountains. The walls were carved with the same primitive symbols I'd seen in the pit chamber, but these told a different story. They showed the arrival of something from deep underground, something that demanded worship and sacrifice. They showed native peoples, not Cherokee, something far older, feeding it prisoners and animals to keep it satisfied. And they showed what happened when the feeding stopped. Darkness spreading across the land, people dying in their sleep, faces frozen in terror, entire villages empty overnight. The symbols got newer as I climbed, showing different peoples discovering the same hungry thing generation after generation. Each time they learned to appease it or paid the price. Until the mining company came and woke it up without understanding what they'd done. My flashlight died completely, but the symbols on the walls provided enough glow to see by. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving through the tunnels, searching. The ghost miners were fighting it, their pickaxes ringing against something solid despite being wielded by translucent hands. But they were losing. One by one, their voices cut off with wet, choking sounds. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the pit room, but still too big to be natural. This one had fresh air flowing through it. I could see stars through a crack in the ceiling far above, almost to the surface. But I wasn't alone. 3 figures stood in the center of the chamber, and these weren't ghosts. They were small, maybe 4 feet tall, with leathery skin and large eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. They wore mining clothes that looked like they'd been sewn for children, complete with tiny carbide lamps. Tommyknockers. They looked at me with ancient intelligence, then began tapping on the chamber walls in complex patterns. Not warnings this time. They were having a conversation, deciding what to do with me. The tapping resolved into something I could understand. "Why are you here?" I found my voice. "People are dying. I came to find out why." More tapping, faster now. The sleeper wakes. The barriers weaken. Your people break the old agreements. What agreements? Feed it or flee. Those are the only choices. We tried to warn your people, but they don't listen to the old sounds anymore. The creature's roar echoed up from the tunnels below, closer now. Whatever the ghost miners had been doing to slow it down wasn't working anymore. "It's coming," I said. "Yes, it knows your scent now. It will follow you to the surface, to your family, your people. Unless what?" The largest Tommyknocker stepped forward. Its eyes were sad and old as the mountains themselves. "Unless you stay. One life to buy time. We will strengthen the barriers, but we need a willing sacrifice, someone who chooses to feed it." I thought about my wife Sarah, my 2 kids. I thought about the people in the valley towns going about their lives with no idea what was stirring beneath their feet. And I thought about the 4 young people who died because they'd stumbled into something beyond their understanding. How long would it buy us? Years, maybe decades. Long enough for your people to remember the old warnings, to learn the old protections. The creature was in the chamber below now. I could hear it breathing, smell its ancient hunger. It would follow me to the surface, and then... There's another way, I said suddenly. The mine. If we could collapse it, seal the tunnels. The sleeper would dig new ones. It has done so before. But if we collapsed the right tunnels, the ones it needs to reach the surface quickly. The Tommyknockers conferred in rapid tapping. Finally, their leader nodded. Dangerous. The barriers might break entirely, but possible. You would need to place the charges in the deep places, close to the sleeper itself. I'd worked mine rescue for 5 years before becoming a ranger. I knew explosives, knew how to bring down tunnels safely. More importantly, I knew how to bring them down unsafely. Can you get me back down there? We can guide you, but the sleeper will sense you coming, and there may not be time to escape. Behind us, something began climbing the tunnel I'd used to reach this chamber. The breathing was getting louder. Then we better move fast. The Tommyknockers led me through passages I never would have found on my own, moving through the mine like they'd lived there for centuries, which I realized they probably had. We reached the main equipment chamber where the mining company had stored their explosives. 60 years later, the dynamite was still there, wrapped in waxed paper and probably unstable as hell. Perfect for what I needed. The creature was hunting through the upper tunnels now, following my scent. Every few minutes, its roar would shake dust from the ceiling, and the Tommyknockers would freeze, listening to sounds I couldn't hear. It knows, their leader tapped against the wall. Hurry! I rigged charges in 3 key locations: the main support pillars that held up the deep chamber, the narrow passage that connected it to the upper levels, and the walls around the pit itself. If I did this right, I'd bring down half the mountain on top of that thing. If I did it wrong, I'd just make it angrier. The Tommyknockers disappeared as I worked, melting back into the shadows like they'd never been there. But I could hear them tapping warnings. The creature was moving, getting closer, following, the fresh scent of my fear. I was connecting the last fuse when it found me. The thing that came around the corner wasn't quite the mass of writhing darkness I'd glimpsed before. It was trying to look human, taking a shape my mind could process without completely breaking. It wore the form of a tall man in a mining foreman's coat, but the proportions were all wrong. Too many joints in the arms, too many teeth in its smile. And the eyes, dozens of them, blinking independently all over its face and hands. Ranger Stormcrow, it said in a voice like grinding stone. You've caused me considerable trouble. I kept working on the fuse, hands shaking. Just doing my job. Your job is to keep people away from dangerous places. This is the most dangerous place in your mountains. Why didn't you keep yourself away? Because young people were dying. It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Young people die all the time, usually for much stupider reasons than feeding an old god. You're not a god. I was worshipped as one for 10,000 years. What's the difference? The fuse was connected now. All I had to do was light it and run. But the creature was blocking the only exit, and it was close enough that I could smell its breath, like rotting meat and old copper. You interest me, William Stormcrow. Your ancestors' blood knows the old ways, even if your mind has forgotten them. I could teach you things that would make you more than human. Like what you taught those kids. They were thieves and vandals. They came here to take and destroy. You came to protect. I respect that. It stepped closer, and now I could see that its mining coat was actually made of human skin, stitched together with sinew. Stay with me. Learn from me. I'll show you how to see through time, how to speak with the dead, how to know the future before it happens. For a moment I was tempted, the kate. Knowledge it offered, the power. I could use that to protect people, to prevent disasters before they happened. Then I thought about the expression on Sarah Chen's face, the terror that had, literally, killed her. No thanks, I said, and lit the fuse. The creature's face twisted with rage, dropping all pretense of humanity. It lunged at me with arms that stretched like rubber, mouth opening to show rows of shark teeth. The Tommyknockers saved me. They poured out of the walls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, swarming over the creature with their tiny pickaxes. They couldn't hurt it, but they could slow it down, confuse it, buy me the 30 seconds I needed to reach the exit tunnel. I ran through collapsing passages as the charges went off behind me, the roar of falling rock mixed with the creature's screams of rage and the Tommyknockers' defiant battle cries. The mountain shook like an earthquake, and for a moment I thought I wouldn't make it out. But I did. Sheriff Morrison was waiting at the mine entrance with half the county's emergency services. The explosion had been felt for miles, and the entrance had collapsed completely, sealing the tunnels under tons of rock. "Will? Jesus, we thought you were dead. What happened down there?" I looked back at the sealed mine, listening for any sound from below. Nothing but silence. "Gas pocket," I said. "Big one. The mine's not safe. We need to post guards, make sure nobody tries to dig it out." That was 6 months ago. The federal government classified the area as a geological hazard zone, and it's been off limits ever since. Officially, it'll stay that way forever. Unofficially, I check on it every week, because sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can hear tapping from deep underground. Not the frantic warning knocks of the Tommyknockers, but something else, something patient and angry, slowly working its way through tons of collapsed rock. The barriers are holding for now, but they won't hold forever. I've started teaching my son about the old ways, the stories his Cherokee great-grandmo used to tell. Not because I believe in them, but because belief might be the only thing standing between us and something that's been hungry for a very long time. And sometimes, when I'm walking the forest trails, I see them in the corner of my eye. Small figures with ancient eyes, still watching, still warning, still protecting us from the things that sleep beneath the mountains. My name is William Stormcrow, and I know there are worse things in this world than the ones that live in the light. Much worse. My name is Samuel Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years in the Daniel Boone National Forest. People think my job is about helping lost hikers and giving nature talks to school kids. They're wrong. Most of my time is spent hunting down illegal operations hidden deep in these Kentucky mountains. Drug labs, illegal hunting, and especially moonshine stills. I've busted 47 moonshine operations in my career. I know every ridge, every hollow, every old logging road where someone might set up shop. The mountain families around here have been making corn liquor for generations, passed down from their Scottish and Irish ancestors. Most of them I leave alone. They're just carrying on tradition, making small batches for family and friends. It's the outsiders I go after, the ones who come in with big operations, cutting corners, polluting the water, and making quick money off our land. My granddaddy used to tell stories about things in these mountains. Booger men, he called them. Creatures that would punish folks who broke the old mountain laws. Said they looked like giant men covered in dark fur, with eyes that glowed red in the dark. I always figured those were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods at night. That was before Copper Creek Hollow. It was October 1976 when I got the call. Hiker found something strange up in the hills, wouldn't say what over the radio. Just kept repeating that I needed to see it for myself. His voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand him. I loaded my gear into the Jeep and drove the winding mountain roads until I reached the trailhead. The hiker, a college kid from Louisville, was sitting on a rock looking pale as moonlight. "You the ranger?" he asked, standing up on shaky legs. "That's right, Samuel Blackthorne. What did you find up there?" He pointed up the trail with a tremblative finger. "About 2 miles up, there's a clearing. I was looking for a place to camp when I smelled it." "Smelled what?" "Death," he whispered. "Something's dead up there, something big." I grabbed my pack and started up the trail. The kid followed behind me, not saying much. The October air was crisp and the leaves crunched under our boots. Everything seemed normal until we got about halfway up. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone quiet. The only sound was our footsteps and the wind through the trees. "This is where it starts," the kid said, stopping dead in his tracks. I looked around. The trees looked wrong somehow. Not dying exactly, but tired. Like the life was slowly draining out of them. Some of the leaves had fallen in perfect circles around the base of each tree, which made no sense with the way the wind was blowing. "Come on," I said, but I had to force myself to keep walking. The smell hit me about 50 yards before we reached the clearing. Sweet and rotten, like fruit that had been left in the sun too long. But underneath that was something else, something that made my stomach turn. When we crested the small ridge and looked down into the clearing, I understood why the kid had been shaking. 5 men lay in a perfect circle around what had once been a moonshine still. The still itself was destroyed, but not in any way I'd ever seen. The copper tubing was twisted into impossible knots, like someone had tied them by hand. But copper tubing is tough. It would take machinery to bend it like that. The men were all face up, arms at their sides, staring at the sky with expressions of pure terror frozen on their faces. No signs of struggle. Their weapons, and I could see at least 3 rifles, were still in their holsters and cases, unfired. "Jesus," I whispered. I'd seen plenty of crime, scenes in my 12 years as a ranger, drug deals gone bad, hunting accidents, even a murder or two. But this was different. This felt arranged. I walked carefully around the circle, trying not to disturb anything. The ground around the still was dead. Not just the grass, but the dirt itself looked gray and lifeless. It formed a perfect circle about 20 feet across, with the twisted still in the center and the 5 bodies evenly spaced around the edge. "You recognize any of them?" I asked the hiker. He shook his head quickly. I didn't get close enough to look at their faces. I did, though. I had to. It was my job. All 5 were strangers to me. City folks by the look of their clothes and gear. They had expensive equipment, the kind you don't see from local mountain families. This was a commercial operation, probably run by outsiders looking to make quick money. But what had killed them? There were no wounds I could see, no blood, no signs of violence. Just 5 men arranged in a circle, scared to death. Literally scared to death, I realized as I knelt beside the nearest body. His heart had given out. I could tell from the way his face was twisted. But what could frighten a grown man so badly that his heart would stop? As I stood up, something caught my eye. Carved into the nearest tree, about 8 feet off the ground, was a symbol I'd never seen before. It looked like a combination of scratches and lines, too deliberate to be natural, too high up to be made by any normal person. The wind picked up, and I heard something that made my blood run cold. From somewhere deeper in the woods came a sound like breathing. Slow, deep breaths that seemed to echo off the mountains themselves. "We need to go," I said quickly. "Now!" The kid didn't argue. We practically ran back down the trail, and I didn't feel safe until we were in my Jeep driving back to town. That night, I called the state police and reported the deaths. They came up the next day with a full investigation team. Their report said the 5 men had died of simultaneous heart attacks. Cause unknown. The still had been destroyed by person or persons unknown, probably with heavy machinery. But I knew better. You don't get machinery into Copper Creek Hollow. The trail's too narrow, too steep, and you sure don't get 5 healthy men to die of heart attacks at the exact same time. I started asking questions around town. The mountain families I'd known for years suddenly got quiet when I brought up Copper Creek Hollow. Old Martha Hensley, whose family had been making moonshine since before the Civil War, just shook her head when I asked her about it. "Some places ain't meant for outsiders," she said. "Some things don't like being disturbed." "What kind of things, Martha?" She looked me in the eye, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Fear. "The kind that's been here longer than we have," she whispered. "The kind that remembers the old laws." 3 weeks after Copper Creek Hollow, I thought I was done with the whole mess. The state police had closed their investigation, ruling it death by natural causes. The families of the 5 dead men had come to collect the bodies, and as far as the official records went, that was the end of it. But the mountains don't forget that easily. I was patrolling the eastern section of the forest when I got a radio call from dispatch. Hunters had found something unusual near Blackberry Ridge, another destroyed operation, this time a marijuana growing site. Same kind of destruction? I asked into my radio. That's what they're saying, came the crackling reply. Strange enough that they called it in instead of just walking away. I knew the area well. Blackberry Ridge was about 10 miles from Copper Creek Hollow, connected by old mining roads that most people had forgotten about. If someone was running a drug operation up there, they'd picked a good spot to stay hidden. The hunters met me at the trailhead, 2 Lake Chihuahua. Local men I recognized, the Jameson brothers. They looked nervous, kept glancing back toward the woods like they expected something to follow them out. It's about a mile up the old mining road, Tom Jameson said, but I'm telling you right now, Ranger, we ain't going back up there with you. Why not? The brothers exchanged a look. You'll see, was all his brother Jake would say. I hiked up alone, following the overgrown mining road. The day was overcast, with thick clouds that made the forest darker than it should have been in the afternoon. I kept my hand near my radio, though I wasn't sure what I'd call in if something happened. The marijuana plants were easy to spot once I found them. About 50 plants arranged in neat rows in a clearing that had been cut out of the forest. Someone had put serious work into this operation. There was an irrigation system made from stolen PVC pipe, expensive growing equipment, and enough fertilizer to keep the plants healthy through the season. Had been enough anyway. Now everything was dead. Not just the marijuana plants. Everything. Every tree within 30 feet of the growing site was brown and lifeless. The grass had turned black. Even the rocks looked somehow wrong, like they'd been drained of something vital. And in the center of the dead zone, arranged in the same perfect circle I'd seen at Copper Creek Hollow, were 3 more bodies. I approached carefully, my heart pounding. Same setup as before, 3 men lying face up, arms at their sides, expressions of absolute terror on their faces. No signs of struggle, no wounds, no blood. Just death by fear. But this time, something was different. These men weren't strangers. I recognized 2 of them, small-time dealers from Lexington who'd been arrested before for running drugs through the national forest. The third man I didn't know, but he looked like city folk, probably their supplier or partner. What bothered me most was how fresh everything looked. The hunters had found this site that morning, but the bodies couldn't have been dead more than a day or 2, which meant whatever had happened here had happened recently. Very recently. I was examining the irrigation system, which had been torn apart with the same impossible strength I'd seen at the moonshine still, when I heard it. The same sound I'd heard at Copper Creek Hollow. Slow, deep breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze, listening. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, it made my ears ring. That's when I saw the tracks. They started at the edge of the dead zone and led deeper into the forest. At first glance, they looked almost human, the right general shape and size. But no human I'd ever seen had feet that big. These tracks were easily twice the size of my boots, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. I followed them for about 50 yards until they led to a tree that had to be over 100 years old. The tracks stopped at the base of the tree, but carved into the bark about 10 feet up was the same symbol I'd seen at Copper Creek Hollow. As I stood there staring at the carving, I heard branches breaking somewhere above me. I looked up just in time to see something large moving through the canopy, something too big to be a bear, too fast to be human. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Ranger Blackthorn, this is dispatch. Do you copy? I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. This is Blackthorn. Go ahead. We've got another report coming in from the south side of the forest. Hunters found what looks like another drug lab. Destroyed, same as the others. My blood went cold. When? Call came in about 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes ago, I'd been hiking up to Blackberry Ridge. Whatever had destroyed that third site had been busy while I was examining the second one. I'll head over there now, I said into the radio. Copy that. And Ranger? The hunters who called it in, they mentioned seeing something moving in the woods, something big. Might want to be extra careful. I looked back up at the trees where I'd seen the movement, but everything was still now, too still. As I hiked back down the mining road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every few steps I'd stop and listen, but all I heard was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. When I reached my Jeep, I found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the driver's side door, right where I couldn't miss it, was the same symbol I'd seen on the trees. Someone, or something, knew who I was, and they wanted me to know they were watching. I drove to the third site with my rifle loaded and ready on the seat beside me. But when I got there, I found the same thing I'd found at the other two sites: dead plants, destroyed equipment, and bodies arranged in a perfect circle. This time, there were 4 of them. As I examined the scene, I noticed something else. The destruction was getting more artistic. The equipment wasn't just broken. It was arranged in patterns. The dead plants were laid out in spirals. Even the bodies were positioned more carefully, their hands folded, their eyes closed. Someone was taking pride in their work. I was photographing the scene when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, raising my rifle, but saw only an old Cherokee man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was wearing traditional clothes and watching me with dark, serious eyes. "You're the ranger," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. Samuel Blackthorne. You shouldn't be here. This is a crime scene." The old man smiled sadly. "Crime scene. Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" He walked to the edge of the dead zone, careful not to step inside the circle of destruction. "Justice," he said quietly. "Old justice. The kind that was here before your laws. What do you know about this?" The Cherokee man looked at me for a long moment. "I know you're asking the wrong questions, Ranger. You want to know who did this. You should be asking why." "Okay, why?" "Because some things are sacred, and some things don't like being violated by greedy men." He turned and walked back into the forest before I could ask him anything else. By the time I finished photographing the scene and hiked back to where I'd seen him, he was gone. That night, I sat in my cabin trying to make sense of what I'd seen. 3 destroyed operations in 3 weeks, 11 dead men, all killed by fear, equipment destroyed by impossible strength, and symbols carved high in trees by something that could climb like a monkey and carve like a man. I pulled out my maps and marked the 3 locations. They formed a rough triangle, with each site about 10 miles from the others. All of them were in remote areas where outsiders might set up illegal operations. All of them were places the local mountain families avoided. And all of them, I realized as I studied the topographical maps, were in areas that had been sacred to the Cherokee before they were forced out in the 1830s. I was starting to understand that I wasn't dealing with a person at all. I was dealing with something that had been in these mountains a lot longer than I had. The next month brought 3 more destroyed sites and 9 more dead men. Word was spreading through the criminal networks that something in the Daniel Boone Forest was hunting down illegal operations. Some of the smarter ones packed up and moved their business elsewhere. Others figured it was just a rival gang trying to scare off competition. They were wrong. I started carrying a camera with me everywhere, documenting each site. The patterns were getting clearer. Every operation destroyed belonged to outsiders, people who had no connection to the local mountain families. Every site was in an area that had spiritual significance to the Cherokee or the early settlers. And every scene showed the same impossible evidence of supernatural strength. But it was the 7th site that changed everything. I got the call on a Thursday morning in November. A deer hunter had found bodies near Devil's Backbone Ridge, a narrow strip of rock that ran along the top of the mountain like the spine of some huge buried creature. "How many this time?" I asked dispatch. Hunter wasn't sure. Said there were too many to count. I felt ice form in my stomach. The previous attacks had targeted small operations, 3 to 5 people at most. If there were too many to count, something had escalated. Devil's Backbone Ridge was a hard climb, even for someone in good shape. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through dense forest and over rock faces that required careful navigation. By the time I reached the top, I was breathing hard and sweating despite the cold November air. The smell hit me before I saw anything else. Sweet rot, but stronger than before. Much stronger. The clearing at the top of Devil's Backbone was about the size of a football field, and it had been home to the biggest drug operation I'd ever seen in the forest. Industrial-scale equipment for processing cocaine, generators to power everything, enough supplies to keep a dozen people busy for months. Now it was all destroyed and arranged in the most elaborate pattern yet. 12 men lay in a perfect spiral around the remains of the operation. The equipment had been twisted into artistic shapes, metal sculptures that would have been beautiful if they weren't made from destroyed drug lab gear. The spiral of bodies led to the center, where someone had built a small altar from stacked stones. And on top of the altar was something that made my hands shake as I tried to photograph it. A human skull, old and yellowed with age. Carved into the forehead was the same symbol I'd been seeing at every site. But this skull was different, larger than normal, with teeth that were too sharp and eye sockets that were too deep. I was studying the skull when I heard movement behind me. I turned around and found myself face to face with the Cherokee man I'd met at the third site. "You came back," I said. "I never left," he replied. "I've been watching you, Ranger, watching to see what kind of man you are." "What kind of man am I?" "The kind who asks questions instead of running away. The kind who might be able to understand." He walked past me to the stone altar and touched the skull gently, like he was greeting an old friend. "This belonged to the first one," he said. "The first guardian these mountains ever had. Cherokee legend says he was a giant, half man and half spirit, who protected the sacred places from those who would defile them. Guardian? Your people might call him a monster. We called him necessary." I looked around at the 12 dead men arranged in their spiral pattern. "This is necessary?" The Cherokee man, I still didn't know his name, nodded grimly. "These men brought poison into sacred ground. They cut down century-old trees to make room for their operation. They dumped chemicals into streams where our ancestors prayed. They took something holy and made it filthy. So something killed them for it? Something protected what needed protecting." As he spoke, I became aware that we weren't alone. There was something else in the clearing with us, something large moving just outside the range of my vision. Every time I tried to look directly at it, it seemed to fade into the shadows between the trees. "It's here, isn't it?" I whispered. The Cherokee man smiled. "It's always here. The question is whether you're ready to see it." "What do you mean?" "Close your eyes, Ranger. Stop trying to understand with your head and start listening with your heart." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I was a man of facts and evidence, not superstition and old stories. But something in his voice made me trust him. I closed my eye. At first, all I heard was the wind in the trees and the distant sound of a creek running down the mountain. But gradually, I became aware of something else, a presence, ancient and patient, watching me from the shadows. I opened my eyes and saw it clearly for the first time. It stood about 20 feet away, between two large oak trees. 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its eyes glowed red like coals, and when it breathed, frost formed in the air despite the November temperature. But what struck me most was its intelligence. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was something that thought, planned, and judged. Something that had been making deliberate decisions about who lived and who died. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, without breaking eye contact, it raised one massive hand and pointed at me. "It knows you," the Cherokee man said quietly. "It's been watching you work, studying you. What does it want? To know whose side you're on." The creature, the guardian, the booger man, whatever it was, took a step closer. I could smell it now, like pine needles and rich earth and something wild that had never been tamed. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through deep caves. "You hunt them," it said, each word carefully formed. The ones who steal, who poison, who take what is not theirs. I realized it was talking about my job, my 12 years of busting illegal operations in the forest. That's right, I managed to say. I try to protect the forest. But you serve their laws, not the old laws, not the true laws. I didn't know how to respond to that. The creature was right. I served the state of Kentucky and the federal government, not some ancient system of justice that predated written history. The old laws are simpler, the Cherokee man said, as if reading my thoughts. Take only what you need. Give back more than you take. Respect the sacred places. Punish those who don't. The creature nodded slowly, never taking its red eyes off me. Choose, it said in its deep, hollow voice. Serve them or serve the land. You cannot serve both. Then it turned and walked into the forest, moving through the trees like smoke despite its massive size. Within seconds, it had vanished completely, leaving only the smell of pine and earth behind. I stood there shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what I'd just experienced. The Cherokee man put a hand on my shoulder. Think carefully, Ranger, he said. It's offered you something few outsiders ever get, a choice. But if you choose wrong, or if you try to play both sides, you'll end up like them. He gestured at the 12 dead men arranged in their spiral pattern. What's your name? I asked. Joseph Crow Feather. And you should know, I'm the one who's been calling in these sites, making sure you found them first, before the state police or the feds. Why? Because the Guardian wanted to see how you'd react, whether you'd try to hunt it down like some animal, or whether you'd try to understand. And? Joseph smiled. You're still alive, aren't you? I looked around at the destroyed drug operation, the spiral of bodies, the ancient skull on its stone altar. Everything I'd been trained to do told me to call in backup, seal off the area, and start a manhunt for whoever was responsible for these deaths. But I knew now that there was no whoever. There was only something that had been here longer than human law, longer than human understanding. Something that operated by rules so old they'd been forgotten by everyone except a few Cherokee who still remembered the old stories. What happens now? I asked. Now you decide what kind of ranger you want to be, Joseph said. The kind who enforces laws written by men in distant cities, or the kind who protects what's truly sacred. I spent that night in my cabin, staring at the photos I'd taken of 7 destroyed sites and 24 dead men. By morning, I'd made my choice. I was going to learn the old laws. Joseph Crow Feather became my teacher over the next several months. He showed me how to read the forest differently, not just as a collection of trees and wildlife, but as a living system with its own intelligence and memory. He taught me which places were sacred, which plants and animals served as messengers, and how to recognize the signs that the Guardian was near. Most importantly, he taught me how to distinguish between the mountain families who belonged to this land and the outsiders who only wanted to exploit it. Your Guardian, I said one day as we walked through a grove of ancient hemlocks. Does it have a name? Many names, Joseph replied. The Cherokee called it Kekle Kudla, which means the one who watches. Your mountain families call it the Booger Man. But names aren't important. Understanding is. I think I'm starting to understand. It only kills outsiders, right? People who don't belong here. Joseph stopped walking and looked at me seriously. It kills those who take without permission, who violate sacred places for profit, who bring poison and greed to clean land. But I'm an outsider too. My family came from Scotland 3 generations ago. Your family came to work the land, not to steal from it. Your grandfather told you the old stories, even if you didn't believe them at first. And you've spent 12 years protecting this forest. That makes you more native than blood alone ever could. I was learning to think like the Guardian, to see the forest through its ancient eyes. When I patrolled now, I looked for different things. Not just illegal activities, but violations of the old laws. People who cut down healthy trees for convenience. Hunters who killed more than they needed. anyone who brought industrial-scale operations into sacred areas. The Guardians seemed to approve of my new understanding. Sometimes when I was alone in the deep woods, I'd catch glimpses of it watching me from the shadows. Once, I found a deer that had been killed by poachers and left to rot. When I returned the next day with a cleanup crew, we found the poachers' camp destroyed and 2 men dead in the familiar circle pattern. But it was in March 1977 that everything came to a head. I got a call from dispatch about a massive federal operation moving into the northern section of the forest. DEA, FBI, ATF, a joint task force planning to establish a permanent surveillance base to monitor drug trafficking through the region. "Where exactly are they setting up?" I asked. "Crying Woman Creek," the dispatcher said. "They've got heavy equipment coming in, planning to clear about 10 acres for their compound." My blood went cold. Crying Woman Creek was one of the most sacred sites in the entire forest, a place where Cherokee women had once come to pray for their children's safety. Joseph had shown it to me just weeks before, explaining that it was under the Guardian's special protection. If the feds started cutting down centuries-old trees and building a military-style compound on sacred ground, the Guardian wouldn't just kill a few agents. It would start a war. I tried calling the task force commander, explaining that the area was environmentally sensitive, but he brushed me off. Federal jurisdiction trumped local rangers, he said. They'd be breaking ground the next morning. That night, I hiked up to Crying Woman Creek under a full moon. The Guardian was already there, standing in the center of the grove like a shadow-given form. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel its rage radiating like heat from a fire. "They don't know what they're doing," I called out as I approached. "They're not here to hurt the forest. They just don't understand." The Guardian turned those red eyes on me. "Understanding is not required for judgment," it said in its hollow voice. "Only action. If you kill federal agents, they'll send the army. They'll turn this whole forest into a war zone. Let them come." I realized then that the Guardian didn't care about consequences the way humans did. It was a force of nature, like an earthquake or a hurricane. It would do what it was created to do, regardless of the aftermath. "There has to be another way," I said. The Guardian tilted its massive head, studying me. "You serve their laws now, or the old laws. Choose." This was it, the moment Joseph had warned me about. I could report the Guardian's location to the federal task force, help them hunt it down with helicopters and sniper rifles. I could fulfill my duty as a sworn law enforcement officer, or I could betray everything I'd been trained to believe was right. "I choose the land," I said. The Guardian nodded slowly. "Then stop them." "How?" "However you must." I spent the rest of that night making phone calls. I called environmental groups and told them about rare species in the Crying Woman Creek area that would be endangered by construction. I called archaeological societies and claimed there were Cherokee burial sites that needed protection. I called local politicians and reminded them that tourism dollars depended on keeping the forest pristine. By morning, I had 3 different federal judges issuing temporary restraining orders and a small army of protesters heading for the construction site. The task force commander was furious when he called me. "This is obstruction of justice, Ranger," he said. "We know you're behind this." "I'm just doing my job," I replied, "protecting the forest. Your job is to cooperate with federal law enforcement. My job is to serve the land and the people who belong to it." The legal battles lasted for months. Environmental lawyers fought government lawyers while protesters camped in the trees, and news crews filmed everything. Eventually, the feds found another location for their base, 20 miles away, in an area that had already been logged and replanted. Crying Woman Creek remained untouched. Joseph found me there on the day the last of the Piartum. Protesters packed up and left. "You chose well," he said. "The Guardian is pleased." "Is it over?" "It's never over. But you understand now. You're not just a ranger anymore. You're a Guardian too." As if summoned by his words, the creature emerged from the shadows between the trees. But this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt respectful. "Brother," it said to me in its deep voice, and somehow I knew that was the highest honor it could bestow. From that day forward, my relationship with the Daniel Boone Forest changed completely. I was still a ranger, still enforced the law when necessary. But I also enforced the older, deeper laws that govern the relationship between humans and the wild places they inhabit. The Guardian and I became partners in a way that no government manual could have prepared me for. It would show me violations of the sacred places, and I would find legal ways to stop them. When legal methods weren't enough, well, sometimes poachers and polluters just disappeared into the deep woods, never to be seen again. That was almost 50 years ago now. I'm retired from the ranger service, but I still live in the same cabin, still walk the same trails. The forest has changed some. More visitors, more development pressure, more people who see trees as lumber and streams as waste disposal. But the Guardian is still here, still watching, still protecting. I've trained 3 younger rangers in the old ways over the years. Not all of them could handle it. One requested a transfer after his first encounter with the Guardian, and another tried to report what he'd seen to the authorities. That one ended up quitting the service entirely after a series of accidents that convinced him the forest didn't want him there. But the third one, a young woman named Sarah Whitehorse, whose grandmother was Cherokee, understood immediately. She's taken over most of my duties now, working with Joseph's nephew to maintain the balance between human law and natural law. The official records show that illegal activities in the Daniel Boone Forest have dropped by over 80% since 1976. Environmental groups praise our conservation efforts. Tourists come from all over the world to experience one of the last truly wild places in Kentucky. What they don't know is that the forest is wild by choice, not accident. That it's protected by something older and more powerful than any human law. That there are still places in this world where the old rules apply, where taking without permission carries consequences that modern people can barely imagine. Sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark and the wind is still, I walk the trails and feel the Guardian's presence moving through the trees beside me. We don't talk much anymore. After all these years, we understand each other without words. But occasionally, when we come across some sign of new threats to the forest, surveyors' stakes driven into sacred ground, or chemical residue in a pristine stream, it will turn those ancient red eyes on me and speak a single word: choose. And I always give the same answer: the land. Because some things are more important than human law. Some places deserve protection, regardless of what any government thinks is legal or profitable. And some guardians, whether they have badges or fur, whether they serve in courtrooms or deep woods, understand that their highest duty is not to the authorities who appointed them, but to the sacred places they've sworn to protect. The Booger Man is still out there in the Daniel Boone Forest, still watching, still waiting, still guarding what needs to be guarded. And as long as people remember the old stories, as long as someone keeps faith with the ancient laws, it always will be. Just remember, if you ever find yourself deep in those Kentucky mountains with ideas about quick money and easy profits, the forest is watching, the land remembers. And some violations of the sacred carry consequences that no court of law could ever impose. Choose wisely. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 14 years. Half Cherokee, half English, I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories about the old spirits that lived in these mountains. I never believed them. Not until last winter, when I learned some things are real, whether you believe in them or not. The Blue Ridge Parkway stretches 469 miles through Virginia and North Carolina, but my section covers the most remote part, 30 miles of winding mountain road where cell phones don't work and the nearest town is an hour away. I prefer it that way. Always have. Out here, it's just me, the mountains, and whatever wildlife decides to show itself. I know every trail, every overlook, every hidden creek in my territory. In 14 years, I've hiked over 10,000 miles of these ridges. I can read weather patterns 3 days out just by watching how the ravens fly. I can track a black bear through snow that would fool most hunters. These mountains are in my blood. But that December morning when I found the first report on my desk, something felt different. The air itself seemed heavy, like the mountains were holding their breath. Ranger Thornfield, the typed report began. My family and I were hiking the Rough Ridge Trail on December 10th when we got lost in heavy fog. We were scared and cold, maybe 15 minutes from panic, when this old Cherokee man appeared out of nowhere. He knew exactly where we were and gave us perfect directions back to the parking area. We tried to thank him, but when we turned around to wave goodbye, he was gone. Completely gone. Like he just vanished into thin air. I set the report down and rubbed my temples. Lost hikers seeing things. It happened more than people realized. Stress, cold, exhaustion. The mind played tricks. But then I found the other reports. 5 more families over the past month. All lost. All helped by the same old Cherokee man who disappeared before they could properly thank him. Same description every time. Gray hair in traditional braids, old-fashioned clothes that looked handmade, eyes that seemed to see everything. And always, he vanished. I pulled the older files from storage going back years. The pattern was there, buried in decades of paperwork. 1995. Elderly Native American man helps lost family. Disappears. 1987. Mysterious, helpful stranger guides injured hiker to safety. Vanishes when help arrives. 1978. Old Cherokee man provides shelter directions during blizzard. Nowhere to be found afterward. The descriptions never changed. Not in 40 years. I stacked the reports on my desk and stared out the window at the snow-covered ridges. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Nunahai, the immortal ones who chose to become spirits rather than leave their homeland during the Trail of Tears. "They're still out there, Maggie," she'd whisper when I was small. "Still taking care of people who need help." I'd always thought they were just stories. The radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Base to Ranger Thornfield." "Go ahead, dispatch." "We've got a report of 2 missing hikers on the Tanawa Trail. Last seen around 2 p.m. yesterday. Weather's moving in fast." I looked outside. The sky was turning that particular shade of gray that meant serious snow was coming. In these mountains, serious snow could kill you. "Copy that, I'm heading out now." I grabbed my gear and headed for the door, but something made me pause. On impulse, I pulled out my grandmother's old journal from my desk drawer. She'd filled it with Cherokee stories and old maps of the mountains from before the parkway was built. I'd never paid much attention to it before. Today felt different. I slipped the journal into my pack alongside my radio, GPS, and emergency supply. Outside, the first fat snowflakes were starting to fall. The Tanawa Trail winds along some of the most beautiful and dangerous ridgeline in the Blue Ridge. In good weather, it offers views that stretch for 50 miles. In bad weather, it becomes a death trap of hidden cliffs and sudden drop-offs. I'd been searching for 3 hours when the snow really started coming down. Not the gentle Christmas card kind of snow. This was serious mountain weather, the kind that could dump 2 feet in as many hours and turn familiar trails into alien landscapes. My radio crackled with static. "Ranger Thornfield, what's your status?" I tried to respond, but got nothing but white noise. The mountains did that sometimes, especially during storms. I was on my own. The missing hikers were college kids from Charlotte, experienced enough to know better but young enough to think they were invincible. Their car was still in the parking area, covered now with 4 inches of snow. Their footprints led up the trail, but after a quarter mile, the fresh snow had covered everything. I stopped at Rough Ridge Overlook and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed off the rocks and disappeared into the swirling snow. Nothing. I was about to continue up the trail when I noticed something odd. There, in the fresh snow beside the trail, was a single set of footprints. Not hiking boots like the missing college kids would wear, but something else. Something that looked almost like moccasins. The prints were clear and sharp, which meant they were recent. Very recent. But who would be out here in moccasins during a blizzard? I followed the prints for about 50 yards before they simply stopped. Not at a rock or a tree or any place where someone might have stepped to avoid leaving tracks. They just ended in the middle of the trail, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. The snow was falling harder now, and visibility was dropping fast. I needed to find those hikers before hypothermia set in. I pushed deeper into the storm, following the ridge line and calling out every few minutes. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint but clear, calling back to me from somewhere ahead. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like someone in distress. I picked up my pace, fighting through snow that was now ankle-deep and getting deeper by the minute. "Keep calling," I shouted. "I'm coming." I followed the voice for another 10 minutes, climbing over fallen logs and around ice-covered boulders. The storm was getting worse, and I was starting to worry about my own safety when I finally saw them. Two figures huddled against a large rock outcropping, waving frantically. The college kids. They were alive, but I could see from their posture that they were in bad shape. "Thank God," the young man gasped as I approached. "We've been stuck here for hours. We tried to find our way back, but everything looks the same in the snow." "Are either of you injured?" I asked, already pulling emergency blankets from my pack. "No, just cold," the girl replied, her teeth chattering. "Really, really cold." I wrapped them in the thermal blankets and handed out heat packs. "How did you end up here? This isn't anywhere near the main trail." They exchanged a look. "That's the weird part," the young man said. "We were completely lost, probably walking in circles for an hour. Then this old Cherokee man appeared and told us to wait here, that help was coming soon." My blood went cold. "What old man?" "He was right here just a few minutes ago," the girl said, looking around confused. "He said a ranger was looking for us and would find us if we stayed put. How did he know that?" I scanned the area. There were our footprints in the snow and the depression where they'd been sitting, but no other tracks, no sign that anyone else had been here. "Which direction did he go?" I asked. They both pointed toward the ridge line. I looked, but saw only swirlies, snow and bare trees. "He knew your name," the girl added quietly. "He said Ranger Thornfield would find us soon, and that we should trust you completely." I felt something cold crawl up. My spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I'd never met these kids before in my life, and I hadn't told anyone my name over the radio. There'd been too much static. "Let's get you two out of here," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Can you walk?" They nodded, and I led them back toward the parking area, following my own tracks in the snow. But I kept thinking about those moccasin prints that had just stopped, about the old man who had known my name and vanished without leaving a trace, about my grandmother's stories of the Nunahai. The hike back took an hour through deepening snow. I got the college kids to their car, warmed up and safe, and watched them drive away. But as I walked back to my truck, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, beside my vehicle, were fresh tracks in the snow, the same moccasin prints I'd seen on the trail. They circled my truck once, then headed off into the woods. But what scared me most was what I found on my windshield. A small bundle of sage and sweetgrass tied with a leather cord in the traditional Cherokee way, still warm despite the freezing snow. I looked around, but the forest was empty except for the falling snow. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" Only the wind answered. I picked up the bundle with trembling hands. It smelled like my grandmother's house, like cedar smoke and old stories, like things I'd tried to forget. As I drove home through the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. Something that had been waiting for me to finally notice it. Something that knew my name. The reports started coming in every few days after that. Always the same story. Hikers in trouble. Mysterious Cherokee man appears to help. Vanishes before anyone can thank him properly. But now I was paying attention to details I'd missed before. The helper always appeared. At the exact moment people needed him most. Never before. Never after. And he always knew exactly what to say, exactly where to send them. Like he could see the whole mountain at once. I started carrying my grandmother's journal with me on every patrol. Late at night in my cabin, I'd study her old maps and stories by lamplight. She'd marked specific locations throughout the mountains with Cherokee symbols I was only beginning to understand. Sacred places, spirit crossings, places where the world grew thin. 3 weeks after the blizzard incident, I got a call that changed everything. Ranger Thornfield, we've got a situation on the Lynn Cove Viaduct. Family of 4 went for a hike yesterday and never came back. Their car's been there overnight. The Lynn Cove Viaduct is one of the most photographed spots on the whole parkway, a curved bridge that seems to float through the forest canopy. It's also surrounded by some of the most treacherous terrain in the Blue Ridge, full of hidden cliffs and steep ravines. I found their car in the visitor center parking lot, covered with frost. Inside was a note on the dashboard. Hiking the Tanahua Trail to Rough Ridge, back by sunset, the Hendersons. They'd been gone for 18 hours. I geared up and headed out, but this time I packed my grandmother's journal and something else, a small pouch of tobacco and sage that I'd found in her things after she died. I wasn't sure why, but it felt important. The trail was different that morning. Not just empty I was used to. This felt watching. Every bird call seemed too sharp, every rustle in the underbrush too deliberate. The mountains themselves felt alert, aware. I was maybe a mile up the trail when I found the first clue. A child's mitten, bright red against the brown leaves. Then 50 yards further, a water bottle. They were leaving a trail, but it was heading away from the mine and path, deeper into the wilderness. I followed the scattered items for another half hour, climbing steadily into terrain that most day hikers wouldn't attempt. The forest grew denser, older. These were trees that had been here before the parkway, before the settlers, maybe before the Cherokee themselves. That's when I heard the crying. Faint at first, but definitely a child. I called out and heard an answering shout. Adult voices, desperate and frightened. I crashed through the underbrush toward the sound and found them in a small clearing surrounded by massive old-growth oaks. The Henderson family, 2 parents and twin 8-year-old boys. They were huddled together in the center of the clearing, and they looked terrified. "Thank God," Mrs. Henderson gasped when she saw me. "We've been lost since yesterday. We kept trying to find our way back, but we just kept going in circles." I looked around the clearing. It was perfectly round, maybe 30 feet across, with those ancient oaks forming an almost complete circle around the edge. In the exact center was a ring of stones that looked old, very old. "How did you end up here?" I asked, pulling out my GPS. The screen showed nothing but static. "We were following the trail markers," Mr. Henderson said, "but somehow we took a wrong turn and ended up here. Every time we try to leave, we just end up back here." One of the boys tugged on my sleeve. "The old man said you'd come." I felt that familiar chill. "What old man?" "He was here this morning," the other twin said. "He brought us water and told us to wait right here in the circle. He said Ranger Thornfield would find us today." I looked at the parents. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "We saw him too. Elderly Cherokee gentleman, traditional clothes. He said he'd been watching over lost travelers in these mountains for a very long time." "Where did he go?" They all pointed toward the same gap between 2 of the massive oaks. I walked over and looked, but saw only dense forest stretching away into shadows. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had passed to Hat Way. But there was something else. Carved into the bark of the largest oak, so old it was almost grown over, were Cherokee symbols that matched ones in my grandmother's journal. I traced them with my finger, and for just a moment I could have sworn I felt them pulse with warmth. "Everyone stay in the center of the clearing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to figure out how to get us out of here." I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My GPS was still showing nothing but static. Even my radio was dead. Not just poor reception, but completely silent. We were cut off from the outside world. I opened my grandmother's journal and found the page with the Cherokee symbols from the tree. Beside them, she'd written in her careful handwriting, "Sanctuary Circle." The Nunahai used these places to help lost souls find their way. But the living must be invited to leave. Invited to leave. By who? I looked around the clearing again, and this time I noticed something I'd missed before. At the base of each oak tree was a small pile of stones, arranged in careful patterns, and scattered around the edges of the clearing were objects that didn't belong. A hiking boot from maybe the 1980s, a faded baseball cap, a water bottle so old the label had completely worn away. Other lost travelers. How many people had found this place over the years? "Everyone hold hands," I said suddenly. "Form a circle around these stones in the center." "Why?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Because I think this place has rules," I said, "and I think someone's been trying to teach them to me." We formed our circle, the family's hands cold but trusting in mine. I closed my eyes and tried to remember everything my grandmother had told me about the old ways, about respect and reciprocity and asking permission. "We're grateful for the sanctuary," I said aloud, feeling foolish but somehow knowing it was right. "We're grateful for the protection, but we need to go home now. We have families waiting for us." The wind through the trees stopped. The clearing fell completely silent. Then, from somewhere just outside the circle of oaks, I heard a voice, old, gentle, speaking in Cherokee words I somehow understood despite never learning the language. "You remember," the voice said. "Good. Take them home, granddaughter. But remember, some are meant to walk between worlds." A path opened up between two trees that I could have sworn had no gap between them moments before, clear and obvious, leading back toward the main trail. "Follow me," I said, and led the Henderson family out of the clearing. We found the Tanawa Trail in 15 minutes. My GPS started working again. My radio crackled back to life. But when I looked back, the gap between the trees was gone. Just solid forest, as if there had never been a path there at all. The Hendersons made it back to their car safely. I filed my report, leaving out the parts about mysterious voices and vanishing paths. But that night, I sat in my cabin with my grandmother's journal open on my kitchen table, finally understanding that everything she'd told me was true. The Nunahai were real. They were still here, still helping people who got lost in their mountains. And for some reason, they wanted me to know about it. The next 3 months changed everything I thought I knew about the Blue Ridge Mountains. The encounters came more frequently, and I started to realize they weren't random. The Nunahai were showing themselves to me deliberately, teaching me things I needed to understand. I learned to recognize the signs, the way the air shimmered just before they appeared, the sudden silence of birds and insects, the feeling of being gently watched. I started leaving small offerings at the sacred sites my grandmother had marked in her journal: tobacco, sage, sometimes just a few words of gratitude spoken aloud, and they began to trust me. The first time I actually saw one clearly was in April, during a routine patrol of the craggy Pinnacle area. I was checking on a group of college students who'd been camping without permits when I noticed one of them wandering away from the others, heading toward a cliff edge in the fog. I started to call out a warning, but before I could, a figure stepped out from behind a tree directly in the student's path. An elderly Cherokee man in traditional clothes, just like all the witnesses had described. He spoke quietly to the young man, who nodded and turned back toward his campsite, seemingly unaware of how close he'd come to walking off a 300-foot drop. The old man looked at me across the clearing and smiled. Then he simply faded away, like mist in sunlight. That night, I found a gift on my cabin doorstep, a small, carved stone bear, warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. But it was in May that I learned what the Nunahai really wanted from me. I was investigating reports of illegal dumping in a remote watershed when I found something that made my blood boil. Someone had been using a hidden valley as a private landfill. Dozens of chemical drums and construction debris dumped directly into a stream that fed into the main watershed. The pollution was already spreading, killing fish and poisoning the water that thousands of people depended on. I was photographing the evidence when I felt that familiar shimmer in the air. This time, 3 figures materialized around me. The elderly man I'd seen before, a middle-aged Cherokee woman, and someone who looked barely older than a teenager but with eyes that seemed ancient. "You see," the old man said, speaking English now with an accent that sounded like my grandmother's. "They poison the waters. They poison the land. This has been going on for months." "I'll report this," I said. Get the EPA involved. Track down whoever's responsible." The woman shook, her head sadly. "By the time your agencies act, the damage will be done, and the ones responsible will disappear, like they always do." "Then what do you want me to do?" The youngest-looking one stepped forward. "What your grandmother would have done. What you were born to do. Walk between worlds. Speak for those who have no voice." I felt something change inside me at those words, like a door opening that had been locked my whole life. "How?" The old man smiled and handed me something, a small leather pouch that felt warm and alive in my hands. The old ways and the new ways, working together. "You know what to do, granddaughter. You've always known." When I looked up, they were gone. But I understood. That night, I made a choice that would have gotten me fired if anyone had found out. Instead of filing an official report and waiting for the bureaucratic wheels to turn, I called in an anonymous tip to every environmental group, news outlet, and government agency I could think of. I sent them detailed photos, GPS coordinates, and water sample results from my personal testing kit. But I also did something else. I performed a ceremony my grandmother had taught me years ago, one I'd never really believed in until now. I spoke to the land itself, to the spirits who had been guardians of these mountains for generations, and asked for their help in protecting what was sacred. The response was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, the illegal dump site was swarming with EPA investigators, state environmental officials, and news crews. The pollution was contained, the responsible parties were identified and arrested, and the cleanup began immediately. But that wasn't what convinced me the Nunahai had been involved. What convinced me was the fact that the investigation moved faster than any environmental case I'd ever heard of. Bureaucratic delays that should have taken months happened in days. Key evidence appeared in exactly the right hands at exactly the right moments. Witnesses came forward who had been silent for years. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring to see justice done. 2 weeks later, I found another gift on my doorstep. A small piece of perfectly clean quartz crystal and a note written in Cherokee symbols that I somehow knew meant "well done." But the real revelation came that June, during the worst crisis of my career. A massive wildfire had broken out in the most remote section of my territory, spreading fast through drought-dry forest towards several sacred sites marked in my grandmother's journal. The fire crews were struggling to contain it, and the forecast called for high winds that could turn the controlled burn into a catastrophe. I was coordinating evacuation efforts when I felt the familiar shimmer in the air. This time, dozens of figures appeared around me, more Nunahai than I'd ever seen at once. Men, women, children, all in traditional dress, all looking at me with expressions of urgent concern. "The fire will reach the sacred grove by morning," the old man said, "the place where our ancestors chose to become spirits rather than leave their homeland. If it burns—" He didn't finish, but I understood. Some things were too important to lose. "What can I do?" I asked. "I'm just one person." The Cherokee woman from before stepped forward. "You're not just one person. You're a bridge between worlds. You have access to both the old knowledge and the new tools. Use them both." What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. Following instructions that came to me like half-remembered dreams, I used my Park Service radio to coordinate with the fire crews, but I also used knowledge that came from somewhere much older. I knew exactly which ridge lines the fire would follow, which wind patterns would develop, which natural fire breaks could be strengthened to contain the blaze. I guided the fire crews to strategic positions that made no sense according to their computer models, but worked perfectly in practice. I suggested water drops in locations that seemed random but turned out to be crucial, and somehow, working together, the living and the spirits, modern, technology and ancient wisdom, we saved the sacred grove. The fire was contained just 50 yards from the ancient trees where the Nunahai had chosen to make their eternal home. That night, as I sat exhausted by my campfire, the old man appeared one last time. "You understand now," he said. "You are the bridge we've been waiting for, the one who can help us protect what matters most." "Why me?" I asked. He smiled. Because you have one foot in each world, granddaughter. Cherokee blood and Park Service training, ancient wisdom and modern tools. You can speak to both sides and make them understand each other. What happens now? Now you do what you were born to do. You walk between worlds. You protect the sacred places and the people who need help finding their way. And when the time comes, you teach others to do the same. He began to fade away, but his final words came clearly. The mountains have been waiting for you, Margaret Thornfield. Welcome home. That was 3 years ago. Since then, my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. Officially, I'm still just a park ranger with an unusual talent for finding lost hikers and preventing environmental disasters. My success rate is so high that other rangers sometimes joke about my supernatural intuition if they only knew how right they were. Unofficially, I've become something much more important, a liaison between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. The Nunahai appear to me regularly now, not as mysterious figures glimpsed in fog, but as trusted partners in protecting the Blue Ridge Mountains. They've taught me to see the forest as they do, not just as trees and rocks and wildlife, but as a living system where everything is connected. They've shown me sacred sites that don't appear on any modern map, told me stories that help me understand how the land itself thinks and feels, and in rituals. In turn, I use my position and training to protect what they hold sacred. The illegal dumping was just the beginning. Over the past 3 years, I've stopped 2 major development projects that would have destroyed important spiritual sites, prevented a mining operation from contaminating a watershed that feeds 3 counties, and quietly redirected several highway expansion projects away from Cherokee burial grounds. Each time I work within the system, filing reports, organizing inspections, coordinating with other agencies. But I also have guidance that no other ranger has access to. The Nunahai can see the long-term consequences of human actions in ways that our environmental impact studies never capture. It's not always easy. There are times when my supernatural sources of information conflict with official Park Service policy. Times when I have to choose between following regulations and protecting something irreplaceable. But I've learned to trust the wisdom of beings who have been guardians of these mountains for over a century and a half. They've never steered me wrong. The hardest part has been the isolation. I can't exactly put consultation with immortal Cherokee spirits in my incident reports. Most of my colleagues think I'm just unusually dedicated and maybe a little eccentric. My family worries that I spend too much time alone in the mountains. They don't understand that I'm never really alone anymore. Last month, I started training 2 other Cherokee Rangers who work in different sections of the parkway. Both of them had been having their own encounters with the Nunahai, but were afraid to talk about it. Now we meet once a month to share information and coordinate our efforts to protect the sacred sites throughout the Blue Ridge. The Nunahai are pleased with this development. They've told me that their influence extends far beyond my section of the parkways. And they need more living allies who can work within modern institutions while respecting the old ways. I've also started keeping more detailed records of everything I've learned, following my grandmother's example. Someday, when I'm ready to retire, I'll need to pass this knowledge on to the next generation. The mountains will always need guardians who can walk between worlds. But for now, I'm content to do my job, both the official one and the unofficial one. Every morning when I drive out to start my patrol, I feel the presence of the Nunahai around me, ancient protectors who have chosen to trust me with their secrets. The Blue Ridge Mountains are more alive than most people realize, full of mysteries and magic that exists alongside the hiking trails and scenic overlooks. Most visitors will never see beyond the surface beauty, but sometimes when someone really needs help, when they're truly lost and frightened and alone, they might encounter an elderly Cherokee man who appears just when hope is running out. He'll give them exactly the guidance they need, and then he'll vanish before they can properly thank him. If that ever happens to you, don't try to explain it away. Don't convince yourself it was just your imagination or stress-induced hallucination. Accept the help with gratitude. Say thank you to the empty forest. And remember that some things are more real than real, more true than facts. The Nunahai are still here, still taking care of people who need them. They've been doing it for over 150 years, and they'll keep doing it long after I'm gone. Because some promises are stronger than death, and some guardians never abandon their posts. The mountains remember everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky or very lost, they'll remember to help you too. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I walk between worlds. It's the best job I've ever had.